father and my brother. It's a small town. All the inhabitants were taken out of their town by the Nazis, by the SS, and were deported to other places. And these houses were used for people who came eventually from all over Europe and the East, because Terezin wasn't just a concentration camp, it was a transit camp. We didn't know that. All we knew that people were coming and going all the time. They were coming from the East, they were coming from Holland, from Belgium, they were coming from Denmark. But the Danish king got his Jews out. And the Danish people who had to, the Danish Jews who had to put identifications on their houses were spared, because the Danes decided to put the same identifications on every one of their houses. So the Nazis come in to Denmark, and the Danish king saved every Jew. And the Jews, he even got a few Jews still out of Auschwitz. So if other countries would have done the same thing, my father and my brother would have not been killed in Auschwitz. So here we were in Terezin, and I got a job to take care of children in the children's barrack. Most of them, probably 95% of them, were already orphans. Many of them had come from the East, from Poland and other Eastern countries. They had no idea what happened to their families. And most of these kids were deported out of Terezin and ended up in places that I had never heard of before, called Auschwitz. I had 30 children in my room, and I took care of them with a wonderful woman from Hamburg who was a few years older than I was. They were terrific kids, and my father did all kinds of wonderful things to make it easier to take care of them. But we are losing our kids all the time, because new transports were leaving. And these sheets with names came out from the Gestapo and the SS. And when such a list came out, everybody was shaking in their boots. Nobody knew where they were going, but everybody was kind of suspicious. Where are we going? And one day, they decided in Terezin, the Nazis, to show this camp, because the world had heard that there were camps in Germany where they were killing people. And they demanded, the Red Cross demanded, that Germany show them a camp. So the Nazis decided to show them Terezin. But they needed some time before they could arrange it. And they used their time to beautify the place. Every house was painted, flowers were planted, trees were planted. In the center, where there was a square, they had an orchestra, they had a band, they had a cafe, and only good-looking Jewish girls could be waitresses. And it was not an overcrowded city anymore, or overcrowded place, because before the Red Cross could come, transport and after transport was shipped to these so-called labor camps. These were children and old people. What were they going to do with these people in labor camps? When you came to Terezin, originally when I came there in '42, there was no train station and there were no rails in Terezin. The next rails, the closest, were in Balshovice. But they even laid rail tracks into Terezin because they were deporting so many people into that place, they needed to have the rails. And people were constantly leaving. And one day, we got notification that we were on the list. And before we got that notification, I told you that the Red Cross came to look at the camp, and I just want to insert this. The commandant of the camp was so happy with his mirage that when the SS caught a filmmaker in Amsterdam, they deported him and his whole crew to Terezin. And he was forced to make a film out of this charade. And the name of the film is Hitler Gives a Town to the Jews as a Gift. That was our town, Terezin. The film has survived. It's at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Technically, it's not terrific, but it's pretty darn good. I have a copy of it at home. So they really tried to bluff the world into believing they were taking good care of the Jews. But the rest of the world didn't care very much because there were rumors coming out what the Nazis were doing, but many people just didn't want to believe it. So one day, we were deported. And we were in these cattle cars. And my father and his friend were trying to look through the little slits of the cattle cars. And I remember my father telling his friend, "We are not going to Dresden. We're already east of Dresden." And my father changed color because my father had been deported out of Terezin early that year to help building Hitler's bunker near Berlin. And he never spoke about it, but he said he heard horrible stories from some of the workers who came from these concentration camps. I had never heard the name Auschwitz before, but that's where we landed. It was a huge transport. People from all over Europe were in that transport. We were unloaded, and there were the SS with their dogs, and I love dogs. And the shepherds, of course, were trained to kill. And women and men were separated. And I looked for my father, who was 42 years old, and for my brother, who was 14. It was such a huge transport, I could not see them anymore.